Mystery. I'm your host, Pem Das. Thanks for joining me as we investigate the stories of the Bible in an attempt to reveal a hidden narrative suggesting that psychedelic mushrooms are the true God of the Bible and the implications of such an idea. Very few, if any, of the biblical stories are original. Most of them can be found in ancient Sumerian and Egyptian texts. In the last episode, I discussed the story of Adam and Eve, but I failed to mention that a similar story existed in ancient Sumer in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In Gilgamesh, Enkidu, like Adam, is created out of clay by a god. However, he's wild and must be tamed. In this case, it's a temple prostitute, Shamat, who is sent to seduce him. After 2 weeks with her, Enkidu learns language, becomes normalized or domesticated enough to become Gilgamesh's heroic companion. Another myth from Gilgamesh that found its way into the Bible was the story of the Great Flood. The Sumerian hero Gilgamesh traveled the world in search of a way to cheat death by finding a magic herb that would give him immortality. And on his quest, he finds the one survivor of the Great Flood, Unapishtim, who tells Gilgamesh a story of how the gods brought a flood that covered the earth. The gods were angry at mankind because they were making too much noise and the gods could not sleep. So they sent a flood to destroy the mortals. However, one of the gods, Ea, has sympathy for Unapishtim. Ea warned him, and he instructed him to build an enormous boat to save himself, his family, and the seed of all living things. He does so, and the gods brought the rain, which caused the water to rise for many days, and the rain subsided, the boat lands on a mountain. Next, Unapishtim sets loose a dove, then a swallow, finally a raven, which found land. God Ishtar creates the rainbow, placed it in the sky as a reminder to the gods and as a pledge to mankind that there would be no more floods. Gosh, sounds kind of familiar, huh? So, as we read through the story of Noah, there's a few things I want to discuss and mention. One of them is this is where the Nephilim come from, or at least they're first mentioned, and this is the idea that the daughters of men marry the sons of God. So I'll try to bring that up a little bit. Talk about the cycle of destruction. This is a major theme in the Bible that happens again one way or another. Another is the concept of the ark as a container for civilization. In this case, a boat. Later, it's the Ark of the Covenant, which contains the Ten Commandments. My argument is that the ark in both cases is a symbol for mushroom, which is the cornerstone of civilization. I'm going to skip over some of the descriptions and the repetitive texts, and I'm just going to focus on the narrative of the story of Noah. All right. Since the time of Adam, 1,656 years have passed by, and people have become degenerate. God has become angry with men because he has become wicked and evil. So God decides he's going to wipe out his creation and cleanse the earth of his great mistake. Except he does find one man he's willing to spare. This is Noah. He gives Noah a vision to build a giant ark and take one pair of every animal. Noah follows the Lord's direction, and he and his family survive the flood. When the water recedes, they're beached at Mount Ararat. Noah and his family come out. He builds an altar, sacrifices some animals. This is called a burnt offering, which actually in Greek is the word Holocaust. Kind of fascinating. Anyway, this pleases God, who says he will never again destroy all living creatures. God gives Noah basically the same spiel he gave Adam about being fruitful and multiplying, using all the animals. And as a sign, God puts a rainbow in the sky to remind them of their covenant or their pact. So, we're going to take a look here at the text. I'm just going to go over this is Genesis 6. I'll be using the New International Version for simplicity, and because I'm mostly just focusing on the narrative. So, let's check it out. All right, I'm going to start here. I'm on Genesis 6, the flood. Basically, Noah was 500 years old. He has three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, like the Three Stooges. Genesis 6, when men began to increase in numbers on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be numbered 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. This is where people get this idea that there were aliens, because they don't really mention this. They don't really describe what they are. Some people say these are the fallen angels. think that all the history I've ever studied, that in ancient times that people were very much different than they are now. We're very different now when you look around. When I look at, there's people from Asian countries, there's people from South Sudan that look a lot different than I do. And I feel like these differences were way more representative, thousands of years ago. People think that evolution is something that happens over the course of long periods of time, but we know that's simply not true. There's epigenetic changes that are occurring within you and me all the time. Environmental factors, the foods we eat, even psychedelics, mushrooms have been shown to cause epigenetic changes. So it's not that it totally transforms your DNA, but it changes the way that your DNA is read by your body and your cell structure, so that it changes you. I mean, I have white hair. After I started eating some of these amanita mushrooms, not long afterwards, a lot of my hair turned like white. It wasn't like I didn't go through the slow phase of just slow gray coming in. It's like it all changed white, like something triggered an epigenetic change in me. So when people talk about evolution and they think it's this long period of time, we are evolving on the fly. And so in just a course of a few generations, I think you can incur a lot of physical changes and even cultural changes that occur, and it's all in our DNA. So I think that when people talk about the Nephilim, I can only assume that maybe these, again, like maybe they were a time where Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted. We think that, and so maybe that's what we're talking about here, and a convergence and mingling of two different cultures. You would have had hunter-gatherers, and then you would have had more of the agricultural people who started, raising, shepherds and eventually agriculture. So these two cultures collide often. So again, I don't know, maybe they were aliens. I don't know what to say about that. But that's there in Genesis 6, so the reference to them. Anyway, Lord God saw how great man's wickedness on the earth had become, that every inclination of his thoughts of his heart were only evil all the time. The Lord was grieved that he had made man on the earth, and his heart was filled with pain. So the Lord said, I will wipe mankind whom I have created from the face of the earth, men and animals and creatures that move along the ground, and birds of the air, for I am grieved that I have made them. But the Lord found favor in the eyes. The Lord found favor in Noah. So what we have here is an interesting subject of the idea that since Adam, it's been about 1,600 years, and you have these generational change. You go from Eden to total destruction in this time frame. So I don't know, people talk about the different years, these real years, I don't know. But what I'm looking at is a pattern, okay? You have a pattern of beginning and end. So in this, whatever their years here, it's marked out. You can count the generations, and you can think about that too as the degradation that occurs in civilizations and societies. So you basically have a point where mankind is basically seen, like, again, I can compare this to now. If I look around, I feel like, I don't want to say that people are all evil, but people have lost a sense of ability to, I guess, focus on being good. I'll give you an example of a cultural, like in movies. When I was a kid, movies had good guys and they had bad guys, and the main story was on how the good guy defeated the bad guy and overcame, helped save civilization, and got rid of the bad people. Well, in the 70s, I started having a lot of anti-hero movies. I mean, there's always been anti-hero stories, but now the anti-hero has become the main actual story. Movies like Quentin Tarantino's that focus on criminals as the main character. And the thing is, it's all kind of a psychological trick, because we tend to feel empathy automatically with the main character. We look for ways to identify with him. So before, we're trying to identify with the guy saving culture, being a good guy, getting rid of the bad guys. And now, culturally, you have people identifying with the bad guys. And as a school teacher, I dealt with a lot of this with my students. They were fascinated by all this. So you have a whole generation who've grown up with nothing but movies focusing on the anti-hero. And that's, again, this cultural shift that occurs over periods of time. You could also look at, there's work done by Howe, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but it's called The Fourth Turning, and they look, these two researchers, I don't remember their names, but you can go Google that. They look at research over the course of patterns in history and They look at how it's generational changes that arrive to a certain place where it's almost like everything is critical of the whole history. And here in America, we're tearing down statues. Um, we're trying to change the laws. We're doing all this weird shit that is basically, we're destroying our culture and we're not replacing it with anything. And if you look around, we have gotten, I don't want to say, I don't like to think of us as evil, but lost. And people don't seem to have any type of center to them. They think everything is okay. The media keeps promoting these ideas that hey, everything's relative, you know. But at the end of the day, man, when I think of morality, man, I think of kind of survival. And so when society is teaching you to hate yourself so much that you've lost the will to survive and you're just consuming, I don't know, but that's kind of where we're at, I think, in our culture, which is a lot like this. And so a lot of our culture seems like it's being destroyed. And if a flood could be an actual physical event, but we're also, many of Western cultures, countries are being overrun with a lot of illegal aliens. They've been prompted, they've been given permission to come here, but not by the people who live here, just the leaders have been promoting this. And so you have a flood of culture that doesn't share or assimilate, and basically, like, we're getting wiped out in a way. And I don't mean white people, but I mean this idea of Western culture and excellence, whatever that is. I'm not saying it's the best, but it's like it's literally purposely being destroyed right in front of us. And the whole thing with the iconoclasm, and that goes on a lot in the Bible too. And I mean, we haven't got there, but looking around and looking at them smashing all the what's it called, statues and defacing them. It's a lot like the Vandals in ancient Rome as well. So you've invited lots of people who don't want to be part of our culture into our country, who are purposely being taught to hate the culture, thus the people who live here, and you're basically turning things upside down. So yeah, I feel like a lot of the time, like Noah, we're living through that same kind of thing. All right, back to this. Okay, so let's see here. So Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people of the earth had corrupted their ways. So God had said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all the people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, and make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out. It goes on to describe the ark here, but the word corruption too is often interesting. When we think of corrupt, a lot of times you could think of rusting. Think of a really nice piece of metal or steel or something that looks really nice, and then eventually it gets corrupted. It's rusted, and that's kind of another way of thinking about this, is that word in itself. God says, I'm going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male, female, to keep them alive with you, 2 of every kind of bird, every kind of animal, every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and for them. Now, this is all very difficult to comprehend, that you would actually be able to do this in modern times, that you were going to save every animal. We know that's just simply not possible. It's actually ludicrous. I mean, however, on the other hand, maybe it would be possible for tribal people to save and collect all the animals around them that they felt were valuable. In a sense, I mean, I just can't imagine that. But at the same time, what we're talking about here is totality. So the ark is something that contains everything. And it doesn't, the boat, does the boat really have all the animals, or is the boat a symbol for something that contains everything? And again, this is where I contend that the ark is part of that, where the mushroom is something where people all over the world have eaten it. They've developed cultures around it, and I can find examples everywhere. So that this in itself seems to breed and create a type of culture and influence people. So I think that's typically what we're talking about here, is that once culture is wiped out, You literally could start it all over again if people were to eat mushrooms, which again I'm thinking about right now. You take a look at what's going on with us. Maybe this is the cure for the corruption in our society. It's not to kill people, it's not to go to war and create more violence, but it's to create a type of violence in our mind where we smash these walls down and we rebuild these. We have a flood, and that's a lot of times a psychedelic trip. The flood comes over, it washes away your whole fucking neural network and the way that you think, and then it cleans it. And so then when you're done, you're clean. You've been baptized. See, all of these things can be symbols for that experience. So that the whole flood, again, it's like washing away everything that's bad in your mind. So this is a symbolic, that type of a trip. So that's why we think about the mushroom is able to reestablish and give you rebirth, not only of cultures in general, but people. All of this stuff is tied together. So that's a Gnostic thought too. Once one person is experiencing this, it's like a drop of water, and collectively we create a bigger consciousness. And anyway, so there's all the dates here. He tells them to store the food. 7 days from now, I will send rain. He warns them. Noah's 600 years old when this happens. All of them are on there. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 17th day, 17th month, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of heavens were open, and rain fell on the earth for 40 days and for 40 nights. For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and the waters increased, and they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The waters rose, covered the mountains to a depth of more than 20 feet. Every living thing that moved in the earth perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, all creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of earth was wiped out, men and animals and the creatures that move along on the ground, and the birds of the air were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. So everything is completely wiped away except for the ark. And again, this I'm contending is the wiping away of a consciousness and the creating of a new one. So after the floodwaters, they actually recede. The springs stop. The water falls away. At the end of 150 days, the water had gone down. And on the 17th day, the 17th month, the ark came to rest on the mountain of Ararat. So after 40 days, Noah opens the window. He made of the ark. He sent out a raven. It kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground. But the dove could find no place to set its feet because there was water all over the surface. So it returned to Noah in the ark. He reached out his hand and took the dove and brought it back to himself in the ark. Waited 7 more days, went out the dove from the ark. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth. He waited 7 more days and sent out the dove again, but this time it did not return. The dove, the raven, there's a symbolism there too with the birds and the whole idea of what a mushroom looks like. A mushroom cap, well, I'll try to put up a picture. A mushroom cap, you do a cross section of it, it could look like a bird in flight. And so people think about also when you use these mushrooms in the tradition, the shamans and the reindeer shamans up in Siberia, they take flight. When they eat these things, they think that they're flying. You could also look in the Arabian culture of the flying carpet, the idea that Aladdin had a flying carpet. Well, if you look down at a mushroom and its amanita, the pattern on it, the white dots, it forms a pattern. So these again are symbols perhaps of flight and the bird itself, and this also connects it back pretty directly with the idea that the story came from the Epic of Gilgamesh and was just adapted. Moving right along here, God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and the wives. Bring out every living creature with you, the birds, the animals, the creatures, move along the ground so they can multiply on the earth, be fruitful and increase and number it." So again, Noah comes out. They all come out. Noah builds the altar, taking some of the clean animals and clean birds. He sacrificed them. The Lord smelt it. The pleasing aroma said to his heart, Never again will I curse the ground because of man, even though every inclination of his heart is evil from childhood, and never again will I destroy all living creatures as I has done. So, the idea that Noah starts sacrificing to God again, it reminds of I guess, of our utility to them. I contend, I don't know, this is the God of the Bible is different from time to time, and some people think that like I guess it's a Gnostic tradition, and that the God of the Bible is often switches between the Lord and and God is reality, and the Lord is like the king of the earth, so to speak, like the richest, most wealthiest people, and the elite society or the angels that surround them. When you think of every other religion out there and all other mythologies, the gods, in fact, that's what they were. They were the elite. They were the top of the pyramid. And in ancient cultures, we're talking about slaves. That's a common theme throughout the Bible too, is slavery. And slaves, they were owned. They were taken from their families, raised by other people, taught languages they didn't know. They were basically an empty vessel, and they were being able to be filled by whatever culture took them over. So that's one of the things here. So they come out of the ark, everything is new. God reestablishes his covenant. He tells them to eat everything. He tells them that I give you everything. With one exception, he says here, you must not eat meat that has its lifeblood still in it. For your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. So basically they come out, they start procreating. God said, this is a sign of the covenant I'm making between you and every living creature with you, a covenant for generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds. It will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures of earth. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy life. So one of the things here, again, that ties the story back into the Epic of Gilgamesh, the whole idea of putting the rainbow up in the sky as a reminder to everybody. At the same time, I want to go back and talk about this story in itself as a mushroom story. We think about a flood coming, right? And we think about giant rains. The rains come, and then there's a rainbow afterward. Well, mushrooms, especially amanitas, they're often associated with rain growth and big storms. Nearly every culture I've studied has something to do with lightning. I have no idea why. It makes me wonder if lightning doesn't have something to do with this. Like perhaps primitive and ancient people literally saw lightning strike the ground, and then within the days or hours they saw mushrooms come out. But at any rate, we often have amanita mushrooms associated with lightning and storms. They appear after heavy storms. Sometimes they can be found in very shallow puddle. So we think about the whole idea that they also are found in the mountains. I've never been to Mount Ararat, but high in the mountains at certain trees is where you find amanitas, and you find them after the rain, and a rainbow would be a sign that it had rained. It's also, the rainbow is super psychedelic. So if you thought you were eating these mushrooms too, and you looked up at a rainbow, it's pretty trippy. Well, I've done it. So another thing to think about the rainbow is you find a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? So that's a leprechaun story. And again, eat mushrooms, you have a psychedelic trip, maybe you see little people, but that's what we talk to. Amanitas give you the giants and the shrinking feeling. So again, getting back to the fairies and elves, and getting back to rain and the pot of gold and all that. So anyway. Okay, so let's do a quick review here. Just talk about the idea that the story of Noah is also found in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's not necessarily original. It basically ties into something being completely cleansed and new and rebirth, which again I feel we can tie into the idea of a psychedelic trip or a mushroom trip, and the idea that it's not necessarily the world that's cleansed, but it's you that are cleansed. And when you cleanse your own mind, the whole world changes. So I also think the flood also is true. I think there's tons of evidence that there was an ancient flood that wiped out a lot of civilizations, and that civilization did start again, and that some of the people were left behind, and those people may have had technology. The people who survived the flood, they had a different type of knowledge than everyone else. So that's another thing that's always fascinated me, was that maybe the survivors of the flood would have been the people who would have been the ones enslaving everyone to the point where we're at now. At any rate, man, that's my take on this, and I hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, thank you very much.